Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Summer School and this session on understanding total pain in dementia care. My name's Diane and I'm one of the Academy leads. I'm going to be here supporting the session with my colleagues. And I'd like to introduce you to George.
Hello. I'm George Rook. I live in North Shropshire. I have dementia, diagnosed 11 years ago. I chair the group called Lived Experience Advisory Panel for Dementia UK. Anyway, that's me.
Thanks, George. My name's Rachel Daly, and I also am one of the Academy lead Admiral nurses here at Dementia UK. So let's get into the session, shall we? So what is the concept of total pain? So it's this term that was coined by Dame Cicely Saunders, who you may or may not know is the kind of the founder of the modern hospice movement.
Yeah.
And she introduced this idea of total pain, where she recognises that pain is more than just a physical sensation. And that actually it really includes these elements of the physical, but also the psychological, the social and the spiritual. And that all of these things actually have a really big impact on how you are affected by pain and how you feel pain. So it's shaped by emotions and relationships and belief systems. And I think, for me, I think this is especially true for people who are living with diagnosis of dementia, because they so often overlap and intensify depending on what's happening in your life at any given time.
I mean, it's very difficult to define non-physical pain.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's like, I suppose, walking around feeling incredibly depressed. That's a type of pain which would actually be embodied in physical pain, but at least it's basically your mind is imagining stuff that is very depressing, and sort of looking at negatives all the time and thinking how awful your life is. Well, that is a genuine pain.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's just that it's not physical, so you can't immediately treat it. Although you can try with certain drugs, but it doesn't necessarily treat the underlying cause. But even if you can't treat it, to acknowledge it and to listen to it will make a huge difference to the person.
Yeah.
And I mean, the dementia often separates people from their social groups, and from socially exploring, just because they lose the confidence. They may actually later on lose the skills that they need. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot benefit from being in social groups, even if they're just watching. Social isolation is really difficult, because if you're not being listened to, you lose a sense of self and identity. You lose agency, and by losing that, you become a non-person, and that's painful.
That's really painful.
So there's four kind of real dimensions, and you spoke a little bit about that, George, just now. It's the physical side of things, the psychological, the social and the spiritual, and that really creates that holistic aspect that we really need to be able to support somebody.
Yeah.
So and as you say, George, the physical, we can recognize that, but just reiterating what you said, George, it's those other elements that that we struggle to recognize the psychological elements. We may recognize that an individual may be feeling more depressed. That might be what we can see in their kind of their moods, the way they're behaving, the way they're expressing themselves. That's something that we may be able to recognize. But it's the social and the spiritual are really kind of those hidden elements that we really need to know the individual in order to recognize whether they're in pain socially. Did they go to church that they may not now be able to go to? And there's that kind of isolation socially, isn't there? And then of course we talk about the spiritual aspects, and certainly people with a dementia diagnosis, they never lose that spiritual need. And it's so important that we recognise that they still have meaning, that we don't lose that disconnection from their beliefs, that we recognise that all of that is still so important to them, even though they have a dementia diagnosis.
Coming back to something that Diane said earlier, just now, about going to church or a group of some sort, I think we should sort of recognise that you can be thinking and feeling things without necessarily going to any groups or church or anything else. So you can be spiritual, and I would regard myself as spiritual, having spiritual thoughts, let's say, but they're not to do with going to church. They're to do with my place in life, my place in the great scheme. And to some extent, I suppose it verges into psychological. And why has my life been as it has been?
I think you're right, George. When we think about spirituality, it's spirituality and religion are really quite different elements. And spirituality, as you quite rightly said, is about who you are as a person, what gives your life meaning. And it's quite often very different to religion and that spiritual aspect that we sometimes think of. That's what we think of when we think of spirituality. We think of religion, but it really is so much more than just.
It's almost for each individual what gives them meaning to their lives. It's hugely complex, but what you've got to listen to people. You've got to ask them and listen, and not be frightened of asking. Now, some people will just respond saying, "No, I don't believe in any of that guff," But if you start probing a little bit, I mean, you've got to be careful not to be a psychoanalyst at the same time. But if a doctor asks me, "Well, why have you been on antidepressive pills for the last 30 years?" And that would start a conversation, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But they don't. No one asks that.
Yeah, really good point, actually, George. Really good point. So this is obviously still just talking about those 4 dimensions, but it's just recognizing how the fact that all of those dimensions, and actually, if you could, you should have an arrow in between every single, backwards and forwards, all the way through and across, but I think that it would just make the diagram a bit messy. And there are some beautiful diagrams of total pain, actually. So they're quite simple kind of just pencil type diagrams, which do show that those arrows just go backwards and forwards between all of those elements, because I think for me, the important thing is the recognition that each and every one of those impacts on each other. So, for example, an example that we've got here is that untreated physical pain can increase anxiety. So, for example, if you've got an undiagnosed headache or tummy ache, that can make you feel anxious, and that in turn can make the pain worse, the physical pain worse.
Yeah.
But it can also make you withdraw because you feel, so this pain and the anxiety then makes you withdraw from other people. So that then creates a social element of pain as well. So, and that might then make you start to try and understand kind of why, and might be on that spiritual level. So I just think it's really important to understand what it is for the individual person, because that's how it feels for me, but it might be completely different for you, George, or completely different for you, Diane.
Mm.
I mean, I think you're right. It's different for everybody, and it's not right or wrong. It's just different. But there are two things here which strike me whenever I go to a deep group, a peer group. So I did a course in my local town called A Good Life with Dementia. And it's all about talking. It's all about recognizing what you're thinking and feeling and just getting it out there and people talking to each other. And it opens people up. It's a sort of slightly psychotherapy type thing, but it's, we try not to become too medicalized on it. But the social pain, the sense of stigma and loss of activities that people feel when they've got a diagnosis, and they just wrap it up in themselves, and then that then contributes to the emotional pain, the loss of independence, worry, and that has a huge effect. And I've seen people just open up in front of 12 people they don't know particularly well, because they start actually saying, well, yeah, actually I don't particularly want to tell anybody because people may think I'm mad or maybe frightened of me or whatever. So until they actually say it and hear that other people are thinking the same, they're locked into that social pain and emotional pain.
We may not always be able to recognise, but quite often people living with maybe a more advanced dementia, they may show their pain in different ways. It may show through certain behaviours that we as healthcare professionals may term agitation or violent behaviour or
challenging behaviour.
Yeah. They may also, withdraw, become non-verbal. They may sleep a lot. And quite often, we do misinterpret these types of behaviours, and this can sometimes lead to that over medicating rather than trying to really understand the individual and why they may be demonstrating these particular behaviours. And if we only treat the behaviour, we may then miss the root cause of the pain. What are they experiencing?
I think for me the most important thing is, before you get to that advanced dementia stage, you should be talking, you should be listening, you should be, enabling, I suppose, people to do what they need to do to retain their personhood and to retain their ability to interpret the world around them, because it becomes more internalized as the dementia continues. And if you haven't already found out a bit about what drives that person and what sort of pain they might be inside, then it's probably too late to find out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's important to know who that person was, what their interests were, where did they work, what were their achievements, what were their hobbies, what did they like doing, all of that really kind of holistic assessment, that holistic care, really getting to know the individual.
But I think it's at that early stage that you need, and you probably do already, frankly, but you and all the other health and care professionals need to be mindful of these 4 domains all the way through everything they do, and to keep finding out and keep initiating talking about it, discussions of it. Even if a person initially might poo-poo it, and usual thing is that someone never been challenged to talk about it before in their lives, and it's completely new to them. They might not have the vocabulary to be able to explain it.
Yeah.
Because without words, you can't pin down what you feel. But I think if from those early stages, you make sure that, yes, there's the life story stuff, but you also consider what people think and why they think it, about their own lives, about other people's lives, about life in general, the spiritual side, in other words, what they do socially, why they do it, and psychologically, that becomes a difficult area, but we need to go there and try to find out if there's something that they are hiding, perhaps. If it's unconscious, you're not going to find it, but if it's conscious, you might.
Yeah.
So you just got to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And that takes time. It also takes effort. And it takes very good listening skills.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in terms of like recognizing total pain, this is just some of those kind of key features, I guess, that you might notice. And there are going to be so many more. But for example, in physical pain, just somebody's facial expression. Sometimes you can tell somebody is in physical pain because of their facial expression, and it might be a grimace, and it might not. It might be a small frown. It might be there might be a physical guarding, if you like, of the area. So if they've got a pain in their arm, they might put they might hold their arm so that they're kind of guarding the area. Yeah.
But you've also got to realise that the grimacing and restlessness might be because of social withdrawal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It might be because of psychological, anxiety, or just mood swings.
And George, do you know, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head, because actually any one of these symptoms that we've got on here could represent almost any element or dimension of pain. And that's so important and I guess this is where the human aspect of pain assessment comes in versus the AI, because the AI will say this person's in pain.
Doesn't say you why. Doesn't tell you why.
Exactly that. Exactly. And what I guess we need to be really careful of is that we don't lean too heavily into that and go, okay, this person's in pain, so we will give them an analgesic medication, like a painkiller.
Yeah.
What we need to think is, this person's in pain. What are they? Why? What's happening for them?
Yeah.
How can we understand that pain, and what can we do that will help them to alleviate that pain? And it might be that if they are a more of a spiritual person who enjoys being outside, we might just need to turn their bed to face the window so that they can see the birds in the garden.
That's me.
Yeah. So it's really important that we don't just go, the person's in pain and this is probably what it is. The person's in pain. How can we understand
Yeah.
What can we do to get underneath it? What's behind the behaviour? What's behind the grimacing or restlessness, I guess?
And one of the most difficult places, I suspect, to do this is in emergency departments, where,
Yes.
I mean, someone told me recently that something, is it 30 to 40% of people who are admitted to emergency departments have dementia. Now, if you are admitted for some medical reason or apparent medical reason, and you don't really know what's going on, you don't know where you are, you don't know who it is that's trying to cuff you and take blood tests and hurt you, and you can hear noises going on around you, or you just got a curtain around you or something. I mean, that is one of the most something. The right word. Discombobulating will do. It is one of the most distressing situations you can be in, and a doctor has got to try and work out fairly swiftly, or perhaps an Admiral nurse. Great use of an Admiral nurse in an emergency department, and they do exist here and there.
They do, George,
to actually try to work out with the person, and preferably someone from their family or a friend who knows them, what's going on, and to also address the physical environment.
And we know that in order to be able to support total pain and to support somebody living with dementia, it does take a whole team, and each individual, whether it be professional or whether it be the family, brings a unique perspective. And listening, as you mentioned earlier on, and being present are some of the most powerful tools that we have. And it's about human beings and not human doings. George, do you want to just share with us your story, if you're okay to share that with us again? Yeah,
it's a good example, I think.
It is.
So about 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation over the phone with a nurse from my general practice. I forget exactly what it was about, but I may have been about blood pressure. And as we were having a conversation, the nurse was obviously reading my notes, and she said to me, well, Mr. Rook or George, whatever she said, your notes show that you are very frail, and therefore we might have to reconsider how we treat you. And this is something totally new to me. I hadn't at that stage been aware of what the frailty scale was. Anyway, she said, "Yeah, you're very high on the scale, very frail." So anyway, I left it at that because I wasn't sure that I could sort of understand what was going on. And over the weekend, that was a Friday, so over the weekend, I came to realise that if what she was saying was true, she was saying that they would not give me the sort of normal treatment for certain things because I was too frail to, I don't know, to be able to cope with it, or it was being rationed from me. I don't know why, but I had the very strong feeling that they're telling me I'm going to die soon. And then they're going to withdraw support in certain circumstances. Now, I've done a respect form, and I do not want to be resuscitated if there is not a very obvious and good chance that I will recover and be able to lead a relatively normal life. But on the other hand, I hadn't thought about dying, the reality of it. And what it made me think was, oh God, what happens next? I've never believed in an afterlife, and I don't now, but it made me wonder whether I should take it seriously or not. You know, it just completely shattered my foundations for a few days.
Mm.
So then I sent an email to the practice, as one has to, and asked for a doctor to talk to me about it. I got back a response that said, yeah, we apologise. You are, of course, not very frail. Some of your medical conditions might suggest it, but actually, you know, if you look at the frailty score, if you're very frail, you can't do anything for yourself. If you're fairly frail, you can't do much for yourself, and you have continence issues and stuff. Well, I don't have it, you know, I look after myself. So he said, we apologise. I will talk to the nurse and tell her that was wrong, and I'll get the score that is on your medical record removed. So it sort of worked out in the end, but that was a classic example of where someone, not even to my face, but actually over the phone, says something which is incredibly spiritually, psychologically disturbing.
Yeah.
And it was just thoughtless. I mean, she didn't do it on purpose. She just didn't think.
Thank you for sharing that.
As an MDT, we want to make sure that we work together, and we give you, for somebody that has a dementia diagnosis, we want to give you the most appropriate care and the most appropriate support that actually meet your needs. And you know, we can see that there are certain parts of the MDT that can actually do that when we're thinking about total pain. But yeah, I think it kind of went a little bit wrong there for you, George, and I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. Obviously,
well, I mean, yeah, okay. Thank you for saying that. But I mean, the essential part of this is we need people to be emotionally aware of the impact of what they say on people, because I mean, I wasn't in any particular pain, physically or any other way, and that immediately created huge psychological pain, and it's just totally unnecessary. Can we move on to this MDT that you've got listed here? Nurses and carers, social workers, chaplains, psychologists and families. That looks to me as if it's very much a hospice MDT role.
It's probably closer to the hospice, George.
Yeah. Whereas most of us don't come anywhere near chaplains, psychologists, well, families, I suppose we do, if we have a family. But or even social workers, a lot of us. So there's no one other than the medical people, generally, for most of us, who are dealing with this total pain of ours. So we can't just, we've got to stop. I don't know how you do this, but you've got to get the medical people, whether they are doctors or whether they are occupational therapists, or Admiral nurses or whoever, have got to be able to bring in this total pain concept into the way they deal with people. It's fine to allow someone else in an MDT to take on those other aspects, those other domains of total pain. But if you never see an MDT, because in general practice in the community you don't, then someone's got to trigger it somewhere.
Yeah, you're so right. And I think that's why we're so grateful for your input
Yeah.
here today, because hopefully that's one of the things we're doing today in summer school, is raising awareness of the concept of total pain and how all of us can play our part by starting to understand it and starting to implement our understanding with people and in the way that we care for people, so that we can create a more holistic understanding of what pain looks and feels like. You know, Laura's done this fabulous presentation about physical pain
Yeah.
and how to assess physical pain and what we can do to assess and manage physical pain in dementia care. And I think this is about, as you say, George, it's about sort of taking it outside perhaps of that more kind of acute environment and perhaps into a more community or care setting, as opposed to like the acute hospital type setting, and starting to help people to create an understanding that sits almost before and after that acute physical assessment and intervention.
I think the word total pain is familiar within palliative care settings, whether that be in the hospice or whether that be in the acute hospital. But we need to, as you say, we need to spread that throughout all of the MDT, so they do have an understanding of what total pain is all about and the concept of total pain and how it can affect everybody. George, you mentioned earlier, didn't you, about pain assessment for that physical pain?
Yeah.
And yeah, as Rachel said, we had that amazing session from Laura. And it's also about observing for patterns and triggers, and looking out for those. Maybe they're really subtle, those subtle changes in behaviour. Again, when we think about the culture and religious impact that might be important for somebody, it's just about kind of knowing and understanding and just trying to kind of bring that in and involving those families. Families are so important when we're thinking about those total pain elements. The family is going to know the individual the most if they're quite a close family. We know families are really kind of complex and diverse, but families are going to know the individual and they can share some of those important elements with you as a healthcare professional. And also it's about trying to create that calm, that familiar environment. It's about creating that safe environment, isn't it? The religious impact, yes, there's many more religions that we need to be very respectful of when we're actually caring for an individual with a dementia diagnosis. And it's about knowing that person, and we go back to that whole holistic element, and it's about knowing the individual and knowing what is important to them and what their choices are and what their beliefs are.
And it's about knowing how to access those
groups.
So we need to do a lot more work on how to understand and therefore make contact, could say spiritually, with everybody within that group.
I think it's very difficult to, as you say, sometimes it's very difficult to talk about. So sometimes it's easier to not talk about. And sometimes there are things that we don't understand because they don't feel familiar to us. And I think the best way of understanding is to actually talk to each particular family, community, whoever. What do you need me to do to be respectful and care for you in a way that meets those needs?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there with, you've got to ask questions. Not tell, just ask and listen.
Yeah, so I think we kind of we've talked a lot about this, but I just think you can't overstate the fact that pain is so personal and complex. So there's not one size fits all, and there's not even one type of pain that fits all. Total pain helps us to recognize the experience of the whole person. And it might be their whole network. You know, it might be their family, it might be their friends, but it really helps us to kind of understand what's happening. And it's really important that we think about holistic care and person-centered care to improve the quality of life, not only for the person, but also for all of their care partners. And that includes, again, family, friends, community. That might be their village, it might be their town, it might be their faith group, but it also might be that their support workers and the care professionals that sit around them too. The better we care for someone, the better our experience is as somebody who cares for them. I think, you know, it's about thinking about that person's body, mind, and spirit in the context of who they are as a whole person.
Yeah.
Thanks, George, so much for sharing with us your thoughts and experiences. Really, really a fabulous conversation. Thank you.
So grateful, George. So grateful.
No, it's a pleasure. I enjoy these discussions. It helps me sort of get a step further along understanding stuff myself.